The Joe Rogan Experience.
Things like that. So
now, in your book, did you go over near-death experiences?
I do, yeah. I have a chapter on that, yeah.
What do you think is going on? Like when people, like the ones that have fascinated me are people in the hospital bed that see their body from above, and you're dealing with a bunch of chemicals that are released in the body, right? There's morphine and all sorts of different things, psychedelic chemicals and all these different things that are happening while your brain is basically on the edge of death.
Right. So it's important to remember that they're near-death experiences. You're not actually dead. So there's a liminal transitional stage there where you're sliding into some other state of consciousness, an altered state of consciousness. And we know that if you inject or you take hallucinogens, those are molecules that operate on a lock and key mechanism with the synapses in your brain, in your neurons. So if these external drugs work in this molecular lock and key mechanism, there must be natural chemicals similar molecularly to that in the brain already, just in smaller doses. So one theory about near-death experiences is that this is a way of transitioning from living to dead without feeling anxious and falling apart and upset and depressed or whatever. It's kind of a smooth, feel-good, better than a morphine drip kind of way of making the transition. And but we know, for example, that this scientist named Dr. James Winery worked for the United States Air Force, working with pilots, accelerating them in a centrifuge, and they would black out. This is part of their training. 2 Gs, 3 Gs, 4 Gs, boom, out you go at some point, like 10 Gs. And most of them have these little dreamlet states that he called them, which are kind of like I saw a tunnel, a white light at the end of the tunnel. I felt myself floating out of the seat and having these sort of weird experiences. And we know exactly what that is. The blood is being compressed to the center of the body, including the center of the brain. The last thing to go is your brainstem, of course, to keep you alive. So the cortex is shutting down from the outside in. That would create this kind of tunneling effect on the back of your skull where your visual cortex is. That would create some of that. Open brain surgeries. These are on epileptic patients where they cut them open and they poke around to see where the seizures are starting, and so they could zap those neurons instead of some big crude attack. And anyway, so while they're doing that, they get permission from the patient to wake them up while they're under, and the brain is open, and they tap around with electrodes. So this is one way to map what the brain is doing. So what do you report when I tap here? Oh, I just had a vision of my 10th birthday or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's where that's stored right there. Well, there's another spot right on the temporal lobes just above your ears where you can tap it and the person says, oh, I'm floating out of my body. I'm up by the ceiling now. And you tap a little to the left. Oh, my left leg is up. My right leg is up. Now my left arm is floating. My right arm is floating. I'm way up here now. Now I'm coming back down just by, with a rheostat, just controlling how much electricity is going into the neurons in that one particular spot. So we know for sure that the near-death experiences are in the brain. The experiences that the people report are real. They have an experience. But we know it's neurologically based. Now, the counter argument is, yes, of course, you have to have your brain to have experiences, but it's kind of like a doors of perception opening into this other realm that these chemicals allow you to do. It's like, by the way, I've been talking with Graham Hancock about ayahuasca. He's invited me to come join him in Rhythmia in Costa Rica to try this. I've never tried this, and I'm tempted to go do this to say, okay, if I'm going to write about these things, I should experience it. But there's a debate amongst people who do this that, is it strictly just in your head and you're not actually going anywhere, or does it open some door to some other dimension? Okay, that's kind of and so the near-death experience believers counter that. Well, yes, it's in your brain, but it still is taking you somewhere else. The problem is that how do you tell the difference between I had a personal experience that the only way you can share it is if you actually go through it yourself. For a scientific community that studies it, well, there has to be some way to test it somehow or tell the difference between that. So, for example,
is that the limitations of the scientific method, though?
Yes,
because when you're dealing with consciousness and you're dealing with memories and dreams and ideas, like you can't measure those either.
That's right. So I quote two other sources. Okay, so first of all, I discuss the most famous example is Eben Alexander's trip to heaven. He wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. Now, this is a Harvard-trained neurologist. He knows more about the brain than I do. And so he knows all the research I'm talking to you about, and there's a lot more. So, but for him, it was so powerful. And, okay, what's it like? So he talks about it in his book. He was in a coma in a hospital. Okay, so he takes this trip, and the colors were unbelievably intense and rich, and I felt just deep personal love for the people I saw and oneness with the cosmos and all, he goes on and on about this. So then I quote from Oliver Sacks's memoir when he talks about in the 60s when he was dropping acid and, the colors were incredibly intense and I had this incredible feeling of love and connecting. And I quote from Sam Harris's, the opening pages of Waking Up, I took ecstasy and I'm sitting there on the couch with my buddy and all of a sudden I feel this intense love for my friend. In other words, the narratives are indistinguishable to an outsider. So how do you know that you're actually going to heaven or you're just having a fantastic trip?
Well, it's entirely possible it's both.
Well, so how do we know? So
we don't know. I think the real problem is people saying that they know.
Right.
Right. Saying that I know that I was in another dimension.
Right.
I know. I mean, it's entirely possible that your consciousness is capable of going through these chemical doorways that are created by these molecules, and that it experiences some frequency on the dial. Like if there's a radio dial, maybe we're at 95.5, but you can get to 97 if you take X amount of milligrams of dimethyltryptamine, and then you go to this new place. But you're still physically here.
Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception.
Yes.
Which supposedly is where the Doors got their name, but no. Somebody told me that's a meme that's not true. I don't know. Anyway, but that's the idea, yeah. Sounds
good.
So, but really what you're getting at is a super core problem of what is truth. How do you know? So mystical experiences are by definition personal, and you can't corroborate them through some external scientific method. So, I mean, science is based on the act that we can falsify a claim. We can test it somehow. And that it's not just me pointing to something and say, I think that's true because I experienced that. So I wrote a column in Scientific American about this called What is Truth? So I start off with the truth for me is that dark chocolate's better than milk chocolate. And maybe you say, no, milk chocolate's better than dark chocolate. And then, there's no way we're going to resolve that.
But is that truth or is that's just preference?
That's an internal state. Or I say, the other example I use is, Stairway to Heaven is the greatest rock song of all time. And then you go, no, Freebird is better than Stairway to... Okay. You can't resolve these things, right? So you slide there into things like these personal experiences we have. So, so what I think Graham is hoping, if I go to Rhythmia and try ayahuasca and I say, wow, I report this fantastic experience I had. Presumably I'll have this. And then it'll be, well, did I, Michael Shermer, go to this other dimension? And now I really kind of, as a skeptic, need to renounce my pure materialistic, monistic belief and admit there's a dualistic, there's another side, there's a spirit side or something. And I'm not at all sure I could do that, because how would I get out of my own head and say, I know for sure that I went to this other place? Because I wouldn't know.